Every organ in the body is circadian in nature. So the entire body is a circadian system.
And when it comes to the blue light, it's not really just our eyes. Like our body has ways of sensing and detecting this stuff, and protecting just your eyes is just one piece of the puzzle.
Try to watch sunrise as much as possible because that's the starting point. I call that the first domino that you essentially push. The more time they can spend outside, the better, right? Even if you're under shade. For most people, since they're metabolically dysregulated, the higher protein, higher fat seems to be better. I think that the problem for most people is obviously that they're eating processed crap that has no nutrients, right?
You know, I stopped wearing sunscreen years and years ago, and I just started to try to get myself more used to the sun.
Melanin offers a host of benefits. It's anti-inflammatory, it's an antioxidant, it is radioprotective, meaning it protects against radiation.
All right, it's time to learn a thing or two about some light today.
There we go.
Thanks for making the time to come on the show today. Where did you start taking this deep dive? I've been following your Instagram and checking out a lot of the content that been putting out. And it's so much around circadian rhythm, sunlight, and so forth. And how'd you start to learn about a lot of this stuff?
Yeah, so growing up, I played competitive soccer since the age of 4. And so, naturally as an athlete, you have some interest in health, right? Because performance is controlled by that. And so I've always been kind of interested in the health subject. Pursued that for 22, 24 years. And then I think the pivotal moment for me, the come to Jesus moment, was my father having 2 heart attacks within the span of a year. And so for me, as somebody who, had a father who could outrun him, outpace him even into his 50s, it was kind of a shock to my system as to how this could happen, especially considering he was my physical education teacher and whatnot. And so that is what really led me down the more holistic health perspective. And then a few years after that, I found Cruz, Huberman, Rick Rubin. That episode blew my mind wide open. And from there, it's just been a pure obsession, pure love for the game of itself. And I think with the way that my skill set is developed, I really find myself at like the cutting edge of this work, and it's the most fulfilling to me.
Do you feel like that potentially there could be a correlation with maybe the sun, maybe lack of sun, and heart disease?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Again, like what I say often is that every organ in the body is circadian in nature. So the entire body is a circadian system. And so once we understand that, then you can dive into the details of the heart. You can talk about blood flow, UVA specifically, stimulating nitric oxide which enhances blood flow. And it's just one of the most powerful things for the cardiovascular system in general.
Yeah, it seems like we end up inside a lot. Even when you're someone that's consciously outside, we're very conscious of it, and we try to pop outside often, but then you find yourself on some days you're like, shit, I've been inside way too much. And especially just, here in Sacramento, it doesn't get that cold, but it does there are, parts of the year where it's fucking cold outside. And so it's harder to get outside, during those times of years. What do you like, where's like a starting point for somebody just to start to maybe just get outside a little bit more?
So I always tell people to try to watch sunrise as much as possible because that's the starting point. I call that the first domino that you essentially push to align the circadian system and get benefit systemically. And so, I think at the end of the day, just telling people that the more time they can spend outside, the better, right? Even if you're under shade, you're working on your laptop, you're on your computer or whatnot. If you can get under shade, then you'd still get the majority of the benefit. And along with that, I usually talk about the light and dark cycle because it's this coupled system that you really need to have in place. And a lot of people talk about sunlight, they think about sunlight, but they don't think about the post-nightfall window as well. And so darkness is a key component to this work. But either way, you want to have both of those things in check. And I think the work is a lot more simple than people make it out to be. Like the science can get way deep, it can get very complex, but the action steps are actually a lot more simple than people imagine.
When we talked to Jack Cruz, he put sunlight ahead of nutrition. And it was, I think, a little bit shocking to us at the time because, if you affect your nutrition, it can make a very big difference, right? So when it comes to the sun, you work with people. What are some of the big changes that you wouldn't have expected that have happened to people you work with just by affecting the light versus everything else?
It's a good question. I would say improving prediabetes is like a no-brainer. Even somebody who's a full-blown type 2 diabetic can definitely see some pretty magnificent changes. I even had one of my first clients had his thyroid removed because he had thyroid cancer a few years back before he found me. And lo and behold, you put him onto a circadian framework and he starts to experience more energy. I mean, like, this is a guy who could barely get out of bed for a lot of days, considering his situation. And so I think that is just an example of how powerful this work is. And again, just because the body is a circadian system, think about the downstream consequences and effects that creating circadian alignment would have. So whether it's brain function, whether it's athletic performance, again, prediabetes, better sleep, better cognition, it just touches everything in my mind.
And food is part of the circadian rhythm too, right?
Of course, yeah.
Like the input of food, it's the circadian rhythm. My understanding is it's like kind of all the inputs and outputs for the day.
Yeah, so let's think about it in this perspective. Like, we have to think about external circadian cues. So light is the most powerful one. You can use sunlight, like watching sunrise is a very great way to align the circadian system through something that we call Zeitgebers, which are those circadian cues. And then you have an improper use of a Zeitgeber of light, which is artificial light at night. And so that gives you kind of the duality here, but the same applies to temperature, same applies to food. You can have a morning breakfast to stimulate leptin sensitivity and, all of this hormonal cascade, or you can have a late night meal, which just destroys everything from metabolism to gut function, whatnot. And so light, food, social interactions, temperature, all of these things are external circadian cues that your body is picking up on in order to go about systemic function.
Yeah, the first time I heard about leptin resistance was maybe 10 or 12 years ago, when I started losing weight after I was done with powerlifting. And I really had a hard time. Like, I thought I've been in pretty good shape most of my life. When I was, in my 20s, I weighed pretty much what I weigh now. I was a little heavier actually than what I weigh right now. And I was surprised that when I was done with the powerlifting, I just thought, boom, I'm just going to pull the weight off. And I went on like a paleo diet. It wasn't super strict. I wasn't really paying attention to like the amount of food I was consuming and stuff like that. But I thought, like, man, as soon as I implement this, because I was eating so horribly before, that I would just see a net result of the scale going down quite a bit. And it took a while. And I think it was because of one of my friends of mine. I was like, man, maybe I developed some sort of insulin resistance or something. My blood sugar wasn't great at the time. And Stan Efferding, a good friend, and he was helping me with some stuff. And somebody mentioned leptin resistance. And I was like, I've never even heard of that. But It made sense because I was doing everything that you could possibly do to go the wrong way. I was eating, very late at night and eating ice cream and cookies and shit like that in an effort to gain weight. And it threw everything off. It threw off my sleep. Once your sleep is compromised, it starts to throw off everything.
And people often say that leptin resistance precedes insulin resistance. So that's an interesting twist to it that I've been thinking about more. And it makes sense when you understand that leptin is a master circadian hormone. It controls where body fat is stored in the body, it controls various aspects of insulin and metabolism for sure. And so in my mind, it makes complete sense that you would start with leptin resistance first as an experience. And then if it's done chronically, then insulin resistance starts to pop up.
And how would you maybe get yourself out of that leptin resistant state?
And how would you know that that's what you're dealing with?
It's a good question. I think most average people for sure deal with some sort of leptin resistance, right? It only makes sense considering the chronic disease burden that the nation is under. Not being hungry, ironically enough, is probably a bad signal. I think there is some nuance there, but you generally want to have good hunger signals. You don't want to just not be hungry, especially in the morning time. And so that can indicate an imbalance in leptin and ghrelin and whatnot. And I think that the morning breakfast is the really key component here. If you can really nail down a higher protein, higher fat breakfast, you can do carbohydrates if you're metabolically flexible. But once you implement that consistently and you stack that onto the cold temperature in the morning, maybe you do an ice bath or whatnot, watching sunrise, and then maximizing the light and dark cycle, I think people should put themselves in a good position to bring back that leptin sensitivity.
There could be a lot of context to a lot of this stuff too, because when we say morning, that might mean something different for someone maybe that has like a construction job. Maybe they start at like 6 a.m. and they're up at 5, and there's probably a large portion of the year that they're not seeing the sun, first thing in the morning. So maybe somebody that lives in a different area that wakes up a little bit later, that gets some sun, maybe they could have more carbohydrate with breakfast. Yeah. If it's like 8:30 and they already got some morning sun, right?
Yeah, the circadian framework is adaptable. So, I don't want people to be thrown off by the work. I don't want them to feel overwhelmed, because I've worked with a lot of people and they can find different ways to implement this work into their lifestyle. So it's not, you don't have to be a victim to this. I think that there's a lot more power in individuals' hands.
On the nutrition side, why do you lean towards protein and fat for the morning? And then you mentioned carbohydrates if you're metabolically flexible. Why is that?
I think it can actually work both ways. So you can have a higher carb breakfast, no problem. I think nutrient density is obviously something that I focus on heavily.
Yeah.
But even in the morning, I mean, insulin sensitivity is at its highest. Generally morning, let's say mid-after or early afternoon time. And so it makes sense to do that. But I think for most people, since they're metabolically dysregulated, especially chronically, the higher protein, higher fat seems to be better. But again, it's just going to depend on the individual.
And that might, good.
So along with that in the morning, for the general type of framework, would carbohydrates come later, or are carbs low for these people in this type of scenario? What does that look like through the day?
I'd say they're definitely lower. But again, let's say they wake up around sunrise, then they watch sunrise. That's when you would implement some sort of nutrient-dense carbohydrate. Like, there's no problem with that. I think that the problem for most people is obviously that they're eating processed crap that has no nutrients, right?
Yeah.
And so once you get the meal timing in circadian alignment and you have decent food that you're eating, over time that leptin sensitivity will start to come back online. And then from there, you just have a whole bunch of second and third order benefits that come with it.
And in terms of the evening meal, we've had Andy Triana, his name's Go Superbrain on Instagram, good friend of mine. He was saying that he felt it was really wise for a lot of people, if like weight loss was the goal, to have protein and fats in the morning and protein and fats also as like your last meal. What are some of your thoughts on that?
Sure. I mean, it can work. It's kind of like the sugar fasting thing. Like, how many different diet variations can you have in order to get benefits, right? There's a lot. It's just about understanding the first principles of it, such as, for example, not mixing a high amount of sugar or carbohydrates and fat. Like, that's one heuristic that you lean on. And for me, all of that works so long as you're just generally following some good circadian principles. Like, I don't want people eating at midnight because, insulin resistance is likely to be higher on that end. The entire organ system is basically designed to rest at that time. And so those are just a few things that come to mind.
A lot of people are probably eating dinner, somewhere between like 5:30 and 7 or something like that in the evening. And then I'm sure like after dinner, most people probably like to eat more and have like a second dinner or like snacks or something like that while they're watching TV. How would you coach somebody through that? Should they be wearing like blue light blocking glasses if they're watching television? Like, what are some of the precautions? What are ways they could maybe just make that environment a little bit more optimal? Obviously, like some small changes to the food would be awesome. But what are some things you recommend?
So again, watching that sunrise, I think, is key because it has so many downstream effects on sleep and how your body is going to respond during the evening time. But I mean, focusing more on the dark part of the day, I mean, obviously I recommend sunbathing to a degree. We can talk about the nuance there. That's going to help in its own right. But even at nighttime, I think that just making it as dark as possible is really key. Because when you study artificial light, which has this basically spike in blue, that can be very problematic from the perspective of essentially hijacking your brain and hijacking the areas that are responsible for leptin, ghrelin, all of these hunger and satiation hormones, right? And so that's a big one for me, is just creating an environment that basically works for you as opposed to against you. When you look at most people and how they live, I think they fundamentally have an environment that creates circadian disruption, which then leads to the very problems that they're dealing with.
Well, can you go in a little bit deeper on that? Because I think some people, they hear that and they're like, I'm getting to sleep well even if I'm not using blue blockers, I'm getting a lot of blue light at night, right? How big of an effect do you think it is, and why is that?
In terms of the artificial light at night?
Artificial light in the evening. Yes.
Oh, massive effect. I think if you look through the literature, I mean, just studying the science, it's been proven to cause cancer in human beings. It has, been proven to dysregulate insulin sensitivity, so it causes insulin resistance directly. And then even if you look at like the body as a circadian system, you have these things called non-visual photoreceptors, which are essentially light-sensing proteins. And melanopsin is the blue light sensor. And so your body is essentially very sensitive to blue light in the environment, and it's orienting everything systemically around that. And so if you have blue light at the wrong time, you end up creating so many downstream consequences. But again, it's so fundamental. Like, this is first principle circadian biology. And that's what I try to push on social media and whatnot, that this is not something that you can just kind of like focus on. No, this has to be the foundation upon which everything is built.
Yeah. So blue light can affect your fat cells differently depending on the source.
Yes.
Okay. And does this kind of go into what you're talking about with sunbathing and how that can affect your fat cells during the day?
Yes, absolutely. So I've actually come across research showing that blue light in the right setting, I'm a full believer that blue light within the full spectrum only can actually accelerate it can actually shrink down adipocytes, which are fat cells. And so that's an interesting concept, especially when you study the pro-opiomelanocortin system. You understand the peptide hormones that are created from that. The POMC system fundamentally uses UV light to be activated. It makes sense from that perspective. And so I've even had people who've come to me who start to implement a sunbathing practice, and they subjectively feel leaner. When they go to do a DEXA scan and whatnot, they're actually objectively leaner. So it's very interesting just off of that one change.
And just by getting out at noon kind of thing, right?
Exactly. And there's a right and wrong way to do it. Like, I'm not telling you to cook under 10 UV index if you have no experience. What I kind of relate it to is progressive overload. The same way like people train and develop that adaptation over time, that's exactly what you want to achieve. And there's a lot of parallels as well. You have melanin memory in the same way that you have muscle memory. You have the concept of hormesis, progressive overload, very basic things that I think apply universally.
And when it comes to the blue light, it's not really just our eyes, right? Like if you're sitting there watching TV and you're in your undies, then maybe you're like that blue, like our body has ways of sensing and detecting this stuff, and protecting just your eyes is just one piece of the puzzle, I think.
Yeah. The skin is a light sensing circadian organ. And so if you look at the skin barrier and every part of it, loaded with these non-visual photoreceptors, which
now you got to be wrapped up like a mummy to watch TV.
Just a basic layer of clothing, in my opinion, is best. Yeah. But I think making the environment darker is going to get people 80 to 90% of the way there. Again, we don't want to be neurotic about the work too.
Right. Try to just use it to our advantage and use it when you can. I think back to Nsema's point about what Jack Cruz was saying on the show about, where he placed food in his kind of, I guess, thoughts for people's overall health. Maybe it was his point. I think that the sun and the circadian rhythm is something that can really like orchestrate everything else that's going on. And so it could be several days in a row where you just feel really tired and you're not sure why. And it's not always just going to be a relationship to the sun or the dark. But a lot of times it is. A lot of times it's going to be like you went to your nephew's baseball game and it ended at 9:30 and you didn't, you got home at, 10 and you didn't have a chance to have dinner previously and so forth. You were rushing around all day. Your whole day is thrown off. You don't get to bed till 12 and you have a full stomach, so you don't sleep as well. And then sure enough, 2-3 days later, that's when you start to see the effects and the cravings and stuff like that. The diet that you've been dead on, you've been really good with your nutrition and everything. So in my opinion, Jack Cruz's opinion is very interesting because I think I know what he's talking about. I would still place food higher because just from what I've seen, if I can help someone with their nutrition, they're going to lose weight. Yeah. I don't have to mention anything them about the sun. But if they start to couple those things together, it's going to be way easier for them to not only lose weight, but also to follow the program that's helping them to lose weight.
So Mark, you have been loving wearing these Paluvas for a long time. Why is it that you like these shoes that look like this?
I'm trying to get my feet to be jacked. I think it's funny how sometimes people will, when I wear these shoes, they're like, oh, those are different. And I'm like, well, maybe you should blame God because this is the human foot. This is the way that it looks. But Paluvas are awesome because it's going to allow you to train your feet and train your toes and allow for that toe spread because you got the 5-finger toe thing going on. It's like put on a glove for your feet. It feels amazing.
It's like walking around with toe spacers. We've been working on our feet for a long time now. You always hear the benefit of people talking about like these tribes who have gone without shoes forever. And they have this toe space and have these amazing feet. And these shoes will allow you to just passively get that back by walking around.
You don't realize what a disadvantage you're at when your foot is all clumped together from the football cleats or soccer cleats or whatever else you were wearing when you were young. And so it's nice to be able to splay your toes. In addition to that, though, one thing I love about Paluva is the fact that it's not a regular barefoot shoe. I do love barefoot shoes as well, but it also has appropriate padding. And when you're stepping on some crazy pebbles and rocks and different things, like when I'm out on a run, some terrain is a little different than others. I don't have to be worried that I'm going to get some sort of stabbing crazy thing happening to my foot because it has an appropriate amount of cushion underneath the foot.
And guys, Peluva has a lot of different styles on their website. I think one of the newest styles they just came out with, which is a little bit more of a rigorous do, is the Strand ATR. It's not these are the Strands, but the ATRs have a little bit more. If you want to go hiking with them, you totally can.
Those are amazing. If you go out, throw those on and go sprint on a field, and your feet feel so strong, grabbing the grass and being able to actually grab the ground with your foot feels amazing.
I'm more of a chill guy with my Peluva, so I like the Zen slip-ons, but that's the thing. With Peluva, there's a lot of different options. So if you head to peluva.com and use code POWERPROJECT, you'll be able to save 15% off your entire purchase. And they also have toe socks. Their 5-finger toe socks are no show, so check those out too.
Yeah, I fully agree. Again, in the same way that you can have multiple dietary interventions to achieve a goal, such as improving body composition, I think, you can gain success with all of these things independently. Like you can focus on the circadian work, gain success, and then you can do nutrition as well independently. I think the most important thing, the thing that I push a lot, is this idea of holism as opposed to reductionism. And we want to implement everything as comprehensively as we can so that we protect ourselves from chronic disease first and foremost and maintain that vitality into older age.
Since we were talking about sunbathing, we've had quite a few people come onto the podcast and talk about the negative aspects of sunscreen, or go into it a bit, right? You can always find research on how sunscreen is beneficial, though. You always see the commercials of how they say it's dermatologist recommended. And I think it's tough for some people to have this idea that it might potentially not be helping them. So I'm curious, you work with a lot of people with this, especially for fairer skinned individuals, right? What should they be mindful about sunscreen? Is there any good to it for them? Do they need it in certain cases? And if they find that they go outside and they just can't handle sun, what is the practices to be able to get yourself to be able to handle sun in a more healthy manner, potentially without sunscreen?
Yeah, this is one of those subjects that, the sunlight skin cancer subject is something that I've cut my teeth on. And so I think that there is a very rare case where I can recommend sunscreen. Very rare case.
What's the case?
Let's say you are at the equator. Let's say you're in Costa Rica. You forgot your long sleeve shirt. You're on the boat. You really there's no way for you to get out of the situation. Sure, put some sunscreen on. Because ultimately it's the chronic use of the sunscreen that I think is more problematic, in the same way with anything in life, as opposed to acute situations. But my concern is actually less so the photocarcinogens in chemical-based sunscreens. I think all sunscreens have this ability to manipulate the full spectrum, which is very problematic if you study the synergistic relationship that all of these wavelengths within the solar spectrum have, right? And so most chemical sunscreens will block UVA, UVB. There are even options that block infrared, which is crazy to me because of the benefits that infrared provides, especially with the red light therapy and all that stuff. But what is it doing to the blue light? Blue light is a high energy wavelength that most sunscreen options do not touch. And so it's essentially letting this blue light through in an altered fashion onto the skin barrier in the same way that low emission glass does. Low emission glass is notorious for causing skin damage and accelerated photoaging. And there's that famous image of the man who's a truck driver for 30, 40 years. One side of his face is completely damaged, the other is not. And I attribute that solely to the glass, not the sun. But modern dermatology blames the sun. And so that's kind of my framework on that. I think that
just because the windows of your car block a lot of the light that could be protective and good for you.
Yeah, low emission glass will block UVB mostly. That's a prime example right there. It will essentially concentrate UVA and blue light together, which are high energy wavelengths that are always supposed to be paired with red and infrared. But low emission glass dramatically reduces red and infrared. And so you quite literally have a situation where you're altering the spectrum to damage the skin in an accelerated fashion, especially chronically.
It's almost like putting a magnifying glass up to your face.
Exactly. And you can see the clear difference, but modern dermatology essentially blames the sun for this.
I think RFK is trying to go after some of these companies that make sunscreen, some of the bigger companies. He's trying to get certain things removed because of some of what you mentioned about the potential carcinogens that are in the product. I think it's easy to get kind of distracted with that whole topic. It's also easy to get confused. And I don't think anyone's really saying hey, go out in the sun, when it's blazing and just fuck it, get used to it.
That's what everyone thinks I'm recommending.
Yeah, you're going to get burnt, and you can make yourself sick.
Yeah.
You know, you can, my daughter, when she was like 3 or 4, we were out at the beach and she was playing and so forth and doing some stuff. And next thing you know, she just got sick, started throwing up a bunch. And it was just the heat, you know, just like not a heat stroke because the water was there, but just a lot of sun for like a little kid. And you kind of forget stuff like that. But she was white as could be and had no exposure, no previous exposure to the sun. So,
and by the way, to your point, like what do I recommend as an option against sunscreen? Like, what are the alternatives? I think taking a proper circadian framework is essential. It's foundational. And so AM sunlight that is rich in red and infrared without UV to prime the skin, especially the circadian clocks within the skin.
That's going to be less likely to cause any tanning and stuff like that, and less likely to do any damage, right?
Yeah, exactly. And so it'll prime your skin for that UV, which manifests a little bit later. And then outside of that, you have melanin, which I talk about a lot. We can get into the details. And then clothing and shade. I mean, if you take a look at animals in nature, what do? They seek sun and then they seek shade. Yep. It's a natural, balanced approach to sunlight exposure because, listen, it is powerful. Like, obviously, you can hurt yourself with sun in the form of heat stroke or burns, but we want to avoid that comprehensively.
What about some of the clothes, like the UVA protected clothes? Like, let's just throw out a scenario, taking the kids to Disneyland or something like that, and you just want them protected. Like, they don't have a lot of exposure to the sun. It's finally the summertime. Everyone's outside. And I understand the shade. Is there certain types of clothes that you recommend, or what's your stance on some of that?
I think it could have a use case somewhere like Disneyland. You do want to avoid burns, obviously, in the same way that you want to avoid injury from training. But again, if you look through the literature on burns, you'd find some very surprising things. Like, total lifetime sunburn is associated with an inverse risk of melanoma death. That shouldn't happen according to the centralized, orthodoxy. And so I think that, burns are no big deal if they're acute, but you don't want to acquire a chronic.
Standing in line for 3 hours or something for a ride, you're going to get nuked, if you're there at 1 p.m. or whatever, right?
Yeah. And so, we want to avoid burns, but I think if you can get, some sunlight exposure on your child or yourself during that time, it's going to be beneficial. But again, it's the education that is so key here.
Is the idea of sunbathing, like, it seems like it's all screwed up because people, like, they'll kind of UV search, like they'll wait for the UV to be really blasting for the day. They'll wait for it to be super high and then they go out and then they lay out in the sun. But they haven't been laying out. They haven't been getting outside hardly at all, like the whole year. Mm-hmm. And now the sun's blazing and they're going to lay out. They're going to wait until that, UV light is at its absolute highest. And that's when they're going to spend an hour or two laying out.
To me, it's the equivalent of trying to back squat 250 pounds when you're a novice. It just doesn't make sense. You're just going to hurt yourself.
Just walk in, you never squatted before, and you just got 2 plates on there, and you're just going to go for it.
Yeah, completely ignoring progressive overload, no understanding of hormesis. Like that's obviously a problem, which is why I think the education is key.
Yeah, I think just it's not that it might sound complicated or it might sound annoying, some of the stuff that we're saying, because I think people are kind of thinking about convenience a lot of times, and this isn't necessarily going to make your life a living hell. This isn't necessarily going to make things that hard. It's not that hard to have appropriate clothes when you're going to go on a boating trip. Mm-hmm. When you're out on a boat that there's it's depending on the boat, a lot of times there's not options for shade. And so clothing is probably going to be your best option. And, I stopped wearing like sunscreen and stuff like that years and years ago. And I just started to try to get myself more used to the sun. And this whole thing started maybe like around 10 or 12 years ago as well. And I was never dark. My skin was never like, it wasn't never like the way that it is now. Mm-hmm. And just by hanging out outside and getting myself used to it. So there might be people listening who think, fuck man, I'm just super pale and I'm going to melt. And there are people that really do have a hard time adjusting to the sun because their skin tone is very, very, very light, and it might take them longer. But most people can tan a little bit.
Exactly, and this is one of the most misunderstood subjects when you understand the mainstream framework. So, you'll hear centralized dermatologists calling, they'll label a tan essentially skin damage, which couldn't be more, that couldn't be farther from the truth when you understand how the body is adapted to deal with that scenario. Number one, melanin, which is just a tan, it's a sign of melanin production, offers a host of benefits. It's anti-inflammatory, it's an antioxidant, it is radioprotective, meaning it protects against radiation, Mother Nature's original sunscreen. It is antiviral, antimicrobial. The literature shows all of this. And so it's not just skin damage. I would argue that it's not skin damage at all, because they're ignoring the fact that there's a very intricate recovery system or repair system involved in the body. And so like a perfect example is how UVB would create thymine dimers, these like DNA mutations. But on the back end of that, you realize that UVB is also the thing that creates vitamin D3, which actually repairs those mutations. And all of this is under circadian control. And so I think that this is one of those talking points that creates iatrogenic harm in my mind. Iatrogenesis meaning that, you end up creating some sort of negative health consequence for the patient directly given by a medical professional. And I don't think it's out of malice. I think they're actually trying to do good, but they don't have circadian biology in their curriculum, which is a huge problem considering the entire system is controlled by it fundamentally.
What about eating certain foods too? It seems like there's certain foods and even certain supplements that you can take that can potentially make the sun less harmful. Like, what is that? It's xanthan or
astaxanthin.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Isn't there stuff? And they're like, I've heard some people talk about like chocolate and certain things, like because they're like basically made and born out of the sun. They're in areas where the sun's real rich, that they have protective properties built into them, and so that when you ingest these things and digest these things, it could potentially not allow you to get the sun the same way. Like, I don't know, just different things I hear that are maybe weird and off course.
It makes sense. They're antioxidants. You're providing that for the skin. Even the quality of the fats you consume. Ultimately, all the skin cells in your body are made of fat to some degree, and so I think that's huge, super important. That not many people consider. I think there is an argument to be made that if you consume oxidized seed oils, if you have a high omega-6 to 3 ratio, then you are going to be more susceptible to burns. That's why all the carnivores are raving about the fact that they can't sunburn. So,
well, let me ask you this. Do you think that there's any legitimacy to the vanity side of this? Because I think a lot of people also don't want to go out in the sun because, skin damage, it will age you. Look at Brian Johnson. I know he is very pale, but he'll never go out in the sun without an umbrella above his head, right? He's very careful about that. So what are your thoughts there?
I can get into some very tricky territory here. I do think that the fundamental assumptions of like melanin being a sign of DNA damage and whatnot do come from, a history of eugenics and scientific racism. I do think it can get to that degree because fundamentally what you're saying, if melanin is a sign of skin damage, then you are essentially saying that, someone who's African-American is somehow flawed.
But they have the best skin and they're out in the sun the most. Oh, shit.
Exactly. And so
black don't crack, right?
So that ties into the discussion. And I think that if you look through all the skin cancer research, along with the photoaging research, what do you find? It's built off of flawed science. They're using isolated UV on nocturnal animals or skin cultures in vitro. And they're doing that in an artificially blue lit lab with a lot of non-native EMF around. That's not how nature works. It's not how a circadian system, aka human beings, works in nature with the sun. And so, those are things to be considered. I think if you have a right circadian understanding and you're in circadian alignment, the photoaging thing is not a problem at all.
Okay.
And again, I think it's inappropriate, sun exposure. Again, someone seeking that they really want to get a tan for the summer, right? And they like, quote unquote, break themselves in a little too early with getting out there and being out there for too long. And then also a lot of people are in a lot of sunscreen, which is allowing them to potentially be out there for like longer periods of time. But I would imagine, throughout history, people probably felt good when they would like lay on the beach for a little while and stuff. But I can't imagine like our ancestors like really just like hanging out for hours on end and bathing in the sun. They were probably just getting appropriate sun. And when it was probably too hot, they were like, fuck this. Like, I'm going to go get some shade and I'm going to drink some water because I'm thirsty. Right. So I think that a lot of times they're really seeking it for vanity and then maybe potentially ruining their vanity because the sun at that time, the UV is high in accordance to their skin. What is that called? The haplotype, or what is that called? The skin.
Sure. Yeah.
I forget what it's called, but they're the Fitzpatrick.
Genetics, epigenetics, mitochondrial.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think people are just seeking it out maybe sometimes too much and maybe too early and so forth.
The way that I use methylene blue is very similar to the way that you're using it. I don't use it every day. I think things that push that button to change your mood, you might want to be a little cautious with it. In my opinion, and the feelings that I get from methylene blue, it does change my mood a little bit. It's a mood enhancer. When I go out and run, I feel like I do have a little bit more endurance. I do feel like I can breathe a little bit better, but that could also be, I've been training very hard as well, so it could be an adaptation to that as well. But as we've had, David Herrera and many other people have come on the show before, they basically just say methylene blue is a electron donor, and it allows the body to utilize energy just more efficiently. And I don't know if I can feel that per se, but I know that I feel better when I'm running, when I'm using methylene blue.
Yeah, post sessions of grappling, that's when I usually use. I use it 2 or 3 times a week. Post sessions of jiu-jitsu, I always feel like I have more energy, like much more energy than I typically have, which makes me understand that, if I did want to go for longer sessions, I could, but it also helps me understand that I'm going to be recovering better for my next session the next day, which is a big deal. But yeah, I think that if you guys, first off, this stuff is great because it's third-party tested. Methylene blue in other sources, like the stuff that you'll see on Amazon or like random websites, there's no regulation. So a lot of people have levels of toxicity from the supplement because it's not dosed correctly. And there are other things in that methylene blue. Again, this is something that is lab made. It's not you know what I mean? So you got to be careful. And this is why we like using this stuff, because we know it's not going to mess us up.
You can go on their website. You can go on the Transcriptions website and you can get a report of the third-party tested methylene blue and double, triple check it for yourself. In addition to that, they have the Canatine, which I have not used that much, but when I have used it pre-workout, I did notice I get a zip from it. I think it has nicotine in it, along with a couple other things to go along with the methylene blue. So do yourselves a favor, check out Transcriptions, check out what they got. Strength is never weakness, weakness never strength. Catch you guys later.
I do agree, which is why we go back to the progressive overload. Like you have to approach this correctly or else you're going to get hurt, right? And, on the back end of that, I think that this is such a big point that I always stress on social media, but like the sun, the full spectrum in circadian alignment is not inherently harmful to any part of the body. That's a very key point in piece of nuance that I try to explain because it just doesn't make sense from many different angles for it to be that. And so I think there are all these confounding variables involved with somebody's lifestyle, especially the fact that we spend 90 to 95% of our time indoors now, on average, and we're under this toxic form of lighting, aka isolated blue light from artificial sources, that has been shown to cause hyperpigmentation in the skin. It's been shown to destroy collagen, elastin, basically everything involved with the skin barrier along with, systemic health.
Before we continue off of this, we're talking about all this light, and sunscreen's popular, but also sunglasses are super popular. I mean, you're wearing these indoors, but these aren't your typical type of sunglasses, right? What's the effect on wearing sunglasses all the time when outside? Because you see parents give their kids sunglasses. I mean, my grandma used to always wear sunglasses outside, right? What are the potential positive or negative effects of using sunglasses outside all the time when it's sunny?
So there is a time and place where you can use them. I think if you have an environment where you have glare that is very active, like let's say you're on the water.
Skiing or something, yeah. Could be
Exactly.
really bright, yeah.
Yeah, you'll burn your eyes, no problem. Those are use cases, but when glare is actively present in my mind. Outside of that, I think it's a net negative for the circadian system. So light sensitivity is something that I hear a lot of. And so people think that they are just inherently sensitive to bright light, but that's not how a circadian species operates. The ocular system is designed to get that full spectrum, at least peripherally speaking. I'm not telling people to look at the sun. And so following that logic, you understand that light sensitivity is a manifestation of chronic sunglasses use, which just flips the entire thing on its head. And even from a scientific perspective, this makes sense because you have these intrinsically photosensitive retinal ganglion cells in your eyes that contain that melanopsin, the blue light sensor. And it's actually supposed to detect bright light outside for photoadaptation, meaning it's designed to adapt your eyes to various light levels in the environment. And so you also get that, you promote that melanopsin function in those cells, and you also make dopamine in response to bright light in your eyes, which then further facilitate photoadaptation. So I think that's one example of how we have iatrogenic issues, which manifest from the recommendations of like using sunglasses, for example. And there are also other problems. I mean, you want UV light peripherally into the eyes to stimulate the POMC system. Pro-opium melanocortin system creates beta endorphin and opioid peptide, CART, cocaine and amphetamine-related transcription peptides, I believe. Another opioid peptide, the MSH family creates melanin, anti-inflammatory, appetite suppressant. Like you just go down the list through the literature, and it's just obvious that I think we have been lied to in a certain sense.
How come the sun sometimes makes some people tired, or makes you feel tired?
It's a good
Like
question.
sometimes a day out at the beach and you come back and you're just like dead. And of course, like maybe you were some active or whatever, but can just kind of make you feel kind of wrecked, kind of tired, and ravenously hungry.
Yeah, perfect time for a nap. I think that it's number one, this increase in endogenous melatonin from the mitochondria through near-infrared light stimulation. So you have two forms of melatonin. You have the subcellular, which is the mitochondrial form, and then you have the pineal form, which is a circulatory form at night. And all of your mitochondria during the day in response to near-infrared light are producing melatonin locally. Now, people say that it doesn't get into the system, into the circulation, but at the same time, I think you have this increase in melatonin, and then, beta endorphin, CART, these are opioid peptides that have analgesic effects. So that combination, it makes sense to me, because I've noticed that like time and time again.
Yeah, and sometimes it could also just be the heat. Like there's a combination of things happening, but for the most part, I've been recommending this to people for a little while, and some other guests have recommended, hey, when you have a break at work, go outside, and if there's an area where you can walk, be great if you could sneak in like a 10-minute walk. It'll really energize you. The movement plus being outside, getting a little bit of sunlight it might not feel like a cup of coffee, it might not feel like your favorite energy drink, but it'll give you a little zip and put a little pep in your step. Yeah.
Small changes. A lot of the stuff is very practical, which is why I say, if you are somebody who works in an office, try to take your lunch break outside. Try to, even open the window and stand by that open window. All these things make a huge difference.
Same thing in your car as well. Maybe just roll, like if time's a little short and the sun's out, you're on your way to work.
Yeah.
Pop the window down for a little while. You don't have to do it in the dead of summer when it's snowing out, or in the dead of winter when it's snowing out, but just do it maybe when you can, just to introduce a new practice.
Yeah, absolutely.
How does you mentioned the POMC gene, how does that tie light exposure to like weight regulation?
So let's think about it from this standpoint. When you have people say that UV light is the main actor on the POMC system, right? Okay. And so UV light basically hits the skin. You can produce POMC on the skin as well. Mm-hmm. And it hits the eyes peripherally, gets into the brain, and that's basically starts the circadian process of POMC creating these peptide hormones. Okay. And so with appetite regulation, you have the MSH family, you have alpha, beta, gamma melanocyte stimulating hormone. They're responsible for a whole host of benefits, but appetite regulation and satiety and just the improvement of metabolism systemically is a big one for that.
Okay.
And so all of these peptide hormones work in your favor in terms of not being as hungry, let's say, which would help you get into a caloric deficit. Even just improving metabolism in and of itself would be huge for a lot of people. And so I think that's the main mechanism.
Yeah, I think I've heard Jack Cruz mention several times that he felt that it's way more difficult to burn fat. Sometimes the idea of burning fat, it's like, I think people want to like perpetually burn fat, but we'll have some guests on the show that will talk in the future about this idea of like, you don't want to perpetually be burning fat. It's not even a healthy thing to have that all the time. But he was mentioning that, having that sunlight first thing in the morning can really be something that helps stimulate burning fat. And so is that what he was referencing, some of the stuff that you just shared with us right there?
I think it's a part of it. He even threw out a study that shows, there was a study recently done that showed that if you don't watch sunrise, then you essentially don't have beta oxidation, which is, fat burning process. And so I don't know, I think this is where the nuance comes in. People can obviously lose body fat without watching sunrise, but I think it can help accelerate that process. And not to mention that red and infrared, which make up most of the spectrum, lower blood sugar substantially. There was a study done that showed that even 15 minutes of, I think, 635 nanometer red light on the back pre a meal can lower postprandial blood glucose by up to 27%. Like,
Damn.
what kind of
That's
an
a big
effect
difference,
is
yeah.
that? It's crazy. And so I think this has massive implications for people in this day and age.
Yeah, my niece is type 1 diabetic, and so much of the information that you hear about like blood sugar and stuff like that is pretty off. You know, we don't. It's not until it hits close to home that somebody really learns it. But my sister-in-law was telling me, informing me of like all these different things that actually bump up your glucose levels, and it was just really fascinating because her daughter would have a meal that had primarily just protein and fat, and the glucose levels would still go up quite a bit depending on what it was and so forth. But I said, hey, maybe just it might be wise to try to get her a little bit more sunlight and see what her glucose is at those times. And she's like, oh my God, she's like, I never made the connection. She's like, I was always just thought it was because she's playing outside. She's like, her blood glucose levels are better every single time. And so it's probably a combination, right? She is playing outside, she's active, right? But then she's also getting sunlight.
And this also works the other way. It's a two-way street. And so if you are eating a meal under isolated blue light from artificial sources, that has been shown to increase insulin and blood glucose independent of food.
Damn, great way to get fat. Just sit in front of the TV and just stuff your face.
And people can test this.
Luckily,
They
I've
have
never done that
CGMs.
before.
Yeah, people have CGMs. They can test this too.
That's a real kick in the pants.
So let me ask you this. When it comes to, you have a lot of stuff when it comes to your light protocol, right? What are the big movers for people who work a 9 to 5? Because we mentioned getting your morning sun. I think you mentioned getting evening sun. Is there just like during the middle of the day, is there an amount of sun that you want to try to get at minimum through the day after the morning and evening?
There is. I think that usually what I recommend is at least 20 minutes.
At least 20 minutes.
If you're a redhead, that can, again, this is all N equals 1. If you're a redhead, 2 minutes of UV exposure might burn you. Okay. Especially if you're somebody who has vitiligo, which is a different scenario. So you have to be cautious. I just generally have to be cautious about recommending it universally. Yeah. But at the same time, for most people, at least 20 minutes. And you don't really have to get the skin exposed. I do recommend it. But listen, if you're outside, you're outside. Mm-hmm. And that's the most important thing from the work that I've studied. And so, yeah, that's a consideration. Watching sunrise, I think, is important for everybody. It's just so key. And then outside of that, making it dark after nightfall is a very important thing. So if you could dim the overhead lights, by all means, that's going to help. If you can use incandescents or beeswax candles and make it just generally as dark as possible, that's going to be massive.
Should darker skinned people try to get more sunlight in general?
Yes.
Should they so I know it probably depends on where they're from and you don't want to give generalities, but how should they think about this?
So darker skinned people have eumelanin, which is responsible for the blacks and browns in nature. So if you look at like a black panther or any other animal, that's eumelanin at work. There are even fungi that use eumelanin in Chernobyl to absorb radiation to grow. And so that type of melanin is incredible because it blocks 99.9% of all UV light. It's the most effective sunscreen out there, which means that you inevitably have to get more sun to compensate for the fact that you have a very effective sunscreen, just endogenously. And this is also where we get into pheomelanin for lighter skinned people, blocks about 20 to 40% of UV light, which is why they have to be more intentional. But yeah, definitely spend a lot more time in the sun if you have darker skin.
I know diabetes is prevalent amongst everybody in the U.S., it seems like. But it does seem like darker skinned people struggle with it quite a bit. Is that part of the reason? Is because they potentially have to expose themselves to the sun a little bit more? Obviously, the food is a huge part of it, so we're not dismissing that. But do you think the sunlight can have a really huge impact there?
I do. I think that, you talk about haplotype and whatnot. These, individuals just need a lot more sun. Whereas if you're lighter skinned, you kind of evolved a skin barrier or a haplotype to deal with more of the cold, less UV light. Lighter skin, in my mind, has actually evolved to absorb more UV light effectively because you're at higher latitude, less UV, and so you need that full spectrum input as much as you can get it. But yeah, I think that's a big part of it. Melanin degradation is huge these days. The loss of melanin from tech use, from being under...
What's melanin degradation?
Basically melanin destruction. So you have melanin throughout your entire body. And that serves as a key process for actually transforming energy You transform the full spectrum, electromagnetic radiation, and then you transform it through melanin into a usable form of energy that the body provides. People call it the photoelectric effect. You create free electrons through the interaction of photons on melanin. But either way, I mean, it's just so fundamental, and you don't want to destroy melanin. And it also goes to this point that people talk about how they get onto a plane. They travel, let's say, halfway across time zones or whatnot, and they report melanin loss. And I think that's because of the non-native electromagnetic environment, along with the just chronic stress that creates on melanin itself.
We were talking a little bit about like light at your house, and you mentioned candles and stuff. And I just want to plug a company because I think it's just super effective. The lights are, unfortunately, they're not super inexpensive, but it's a company called Block Blue Light. And when you change the light, like if you flick it 2 or 3 different times, it has a couple different settings. So setting number 1, it's kind of just like a regular light. That way it's not pissing off your wife or girlfriend or somebody else in the house that just like wants to be able to see, right? And then it goes like medium, and then it goes more like a yellowish color. How can someone learn, and yeah, Ryan brought it up on the screen there. How can someone learn like what would work in their home in terms of like effectiveness? Because there's probably a lot of companies like this that are selling you one thing, but you're really kind of getting another. So like, is there a way to, it's probably not simple. You probably got to look at the specs and everything. And what are you looking for when you start to think about like, how can we, protect ourselves a little bit from blue light?
I actually don't think you need to look at the specs at all, which is good news for people. I think that number 1, get in touch with the intuitive feeling of your light environment after nightfall. Like if you are doing this work correctly, you should be tired within 15 minutes of being in that environment. It's, a lot of people report they put on the blue light blockers that are dark orange or red, and their eyes feel tired almost immediately. Yeah. So that's a real thing that I want people to rely on. But outside of that, I mean, it's just, watching for flicker, I think, is an important thing. You can take your iPhone, do it on slow-mo, video mode, and then see if the light source is flickering. That's a big one. And looking at the spectrum, most importantly. So if a company doesn't provide a spectrum or spectral output of what their light is actually, that is a red flag in my mind.
Like they're hiding it, they're not sharing it, and maybe it's just like they're just changing color slightly, but not actually really improving much of anything.
Yeah, and you don't want that big spike of blue at night.
And the main thing also too is just get it dark.
Exactly.
Just try to keep things dark. There's not really a great. The best thing for you to do is just to probably get to bed. Start to unwind, get shit as dark as you can. And then for practical purposes, yes, you may use some of these lights and some candles and so forth.
Yeah, exactly. I think a lot of the work is a lot more simple than people make it out to be.
You mentioned light food. We've talked about these types of different lights. Is there anything else, any type of maybe supplementation? Do you have people supplement vitamin D in certain scenarios? Like, what else is there that you have people use?
I think the use case for vitamin D supplementation is, again, kind of like the sunscreen. Okay. Very rare circumstances, maybe if you're extremely deficient. But there's a difference between endogenous and exogenous vitamin D. Yeah. And so you have the work of Dr. Alexander Wunsch, who is in Germany. He's a photobiologist, I believe. And he basically breaks down the different transport routes within the body from endogenous to exogenous. And, so first of all, like supplemental vitamin D is not as effective as people make it out to be, because there's kind of this hyper reductionist approach on 25-hydroxy. Like I have to get my 25-hydroxy right. And there's also a lot of other metabolites of vitamin D that are not fat soluble, that are stored in your system. And so this is also something to consider when you head into wintertime. Like you kind of want to maximize that sunlight and D3 during the summer, store it in the body fat and other places, and then use that heading into the winter with a circadian appropriate framework. And so I think there's a lot of misunderstanding within that space for sure.
The body really seems to just do an amazing job of like protecting itself and so forth, and I think it's easy to get caught up in the supplement world. It's easy to get caught up in like, I'm going to take this for my health. But then sometimes like if you're taking something like vitamin D, people are like, oh, that goes with like vitamin K. And then if you're going to be taking vitamin D and vitamin K, then it's great to take with magnesium. Yeah. And you just end up with this like giant supplement stack. And you're like, do I even really need any of this? And I think you can make a case where potentially you can convince yourself that you need it, but you probably really don't necessarily. But I guess also too, if you're emptying the tank every day and you're training really hard and you don't maybe make that much time for getting outside, and maybe it's winter and so forth. Maybe there's a use case there, you think, with something like vitamin D, or maybe just like naturally your vitamin D is probably supposed to go up and down anyway, right?
Yeah, I think there's a cyclical variation to it. I mean, we are seasonal cyclical creatures, so it makes sense in my mind. And again, I'm not a light Nazi. Like I educate people on circadian biology, but I do accept the fact that, listen, supplemental magnesium in the right form is very important, especially considering soil degradation and, you know, magnesium deficiency on that end. So I try to strike a fine balance where, you know, with other people you see a very hard stance approach. But you know, I'll tell people when I do find it, or I do have a hard stance, and I'll tell people when I don't. And I think the most important thing is getting people interested in the work so that they can benefit.
What's your thought on just red light? You know, just having some red light at the home. Like, are these as beneficial as people want to think, or what are your thoughts?
I think so. I think if you look at the literature, it's just overwhelming. You know, everything from lowering your blood sugar to helping heal pain, reducing chronic inflammation, all of these things are just undeniable in my mind. And so they definitely have a place. I think that there are, you know, maybe some shady actors, as with any industry. But most red light companies that I've seen, whether it be Chroma or EMR Tech, they're pretty fantastic in terms of their ability to use these wavelengths for overall systemic health.
What's to pay attention to in terms of the bad actors? Just curious there. Because I think a lot of people, like for example, EMR Tech, we use them, but some people don't want to purchase that, so they'll maybe go to Alibaba or something and they'll try to find a red light device there that's much cheaper. What to pay attention to?
It's a good question.
Maybe when they're not putting out the specs, just like what you mentioned about the light earlier.
I think that's a big part of it. What else comes to mind? Really, if you find an option that's like overtly expensive, like if you're talking about like a panel this size that's like $600, don't go for it. That's probably the biggest thing in my mind, because I feel like with a lot of these companies in this space, you're paying a lot more for the brand name. And I'll be honest here, like a company like for blue light blockers, like Raw Optics, you're paying for the brand name, okay? And I have my own problems with certain companies on that end and what they create.
$300?
Exactly. The blue blockers are a great example because you can find great sources on Alibaba or other, you know, super cheap investments. All you need is dark orange and red lenses.
I would also say, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that if the thing just doesn't need that much power or doesn't use that much power, it's probably not really that powerful. Probably not really doing much. So like if things have batteries, like I'm not going to say flat out that they don't work. I don't know that. I haven't researched it. But some of the ones that you put on your skin, like again, I haven't researched it. I don't know for sure. I don't want to like kill those companies, but I don't think those are nearly as effective as some of the lights where you got to, you know, plug them into the wall and stuff like that.
Yeah. I mean, the intensity of the wavelengths is very important. So, you know, I have no problem standing by that at all.
All right, Mark, you're getting leaner and leaner, but you always enjoy the food you're eating. So how you doing it?
I got a secret, man. It's called Good Life Protein.
Okay, tell me about that.
I've been doing some Good Life Protein. You know, we've been talking on the show for a really long time of certified Piedmontese beef, and you can get that under the umbrella of Good Life Proteins, which also has chicken breast, chicken thighs, sausage, shrimp, scallops, all kinds of different fish, salmon, tilapia. The website has nearly any kind of meat that you can think of. Lamb is another one that comes to mind. And so I've been utilizing and kind of using some different strategy, kind of depending on the way that I'm eating. So if I'm doing a keto diet, I'll eat more fat, and that's where I might get the sausage, and I might get their 80-20 grass-fed, grass-finished ground beef. I might get bacon. And there's other days where I kind of do a little bit more bodybuilder style, where the fat is, you know, might be like 40 grams or something like that. And then I'll have some of the leaner cuts of the certified Piedmontese beef.
This is one of the reasons why, like, neither of us find it hard to stay in shape, because we're always enjoying the food we're eating. And protein, you talk about protein, leverage it all the time. It's satiating and helps you feel full.
I look forward to every meal. And I can surf and turf, you know.
Yeah.
I could cook up some, chicken thighs or something like that and have some shrimp with it, or I could have some steak. I would say, you know, the steak, it keeps going back and forth for me on my favorites, so it's hard for me to lock one down, but I really love the bavette steaks.
Yeah.
And then I also love the ribeyes as well.
You can't go wrong with the ribeye. So, guys, if you guys want to get your hands on some really good meat, you can head to goodlifeproteins.com and use code POWER for 20% off any purchases made on the website, or you can use code POWERPROJECT to get an extra 5% off if you subscribe and save to any meats that are a recurring purchase.
This is the best meat in the world. What's a day look like for you, like with trying to do all this? Because I know that you're very active with your business and you guys are recording, you have a podcast and you're doing a lot of other things. Is it just as simple as like, hey man, I've been inside a lot, I better get outside?
Yeah, I mean, it is a lot, you know, it does follow that kind of guideline. I think that number one, sunrise is something that I always wake up for. So I typically shift with the seasons. So, you know, sunrise sometimes will be 8:50 a.m. I'll wake up around 10 to 15 minutes prior. And then during summer, it's a lot, you know, you have longer light cycles. And so I try to wake up for that too. And then from there, it's just spending as much time as I can outside with most of the skin exposed. And, you know, also not being neurotic about it, because there is some good research showing that if you get a lot more sunlight during the day, you seem to be less sensitive to artificial light at night. So again, great news for people who are getting into this work. And outside of that, it's just trying to time meals outside. You know, after every meal, going outside for 15, 20 minutes, doing a brisk walk or, you know, some push-ups and squats and whatnot. And once nightfall occurs, it's just dark mode. And
I love going outside at night. You know, luckily my dogs, they want to go outside. So, you know, bringing them out in the backyard is great. And it's dark and all I can see is like stars and stuff like that. And it feels really calm and really peaceful. It's a good, like, when I do that, before I go to bed, it's a good like transition into like bedtime.
Yeah. And most importantly, it's going to help people heal. I think that's ultimately why we're all in this work to some degree.
Real quick, let's rewind to the solar callus for, again, fair-skinned people, because I think we talked a little bit about obviously not going out when the UV index is way too high. But if someone is very pale, right, or they find that they are sensitive to that light, what should they think about when looking at the UV index, going out and trying to build a solar callus?
So for those people, since they are most susceptible to burning, especially redheads, you really want to focus on the morning time first, when there's no UV.
Okay.
So you can use a free app called the My Circadian app, track UV and when UVA and UVB comes out. But that morning time, usually sunrise to around 8 or 9 a.m., depending on the latitude and location, is like, that's the gold standard. You want to spend as much time outside, most of the skin exposed, sunbathing at that time to prime the skin. And then from that point forward, it's kind of, you approach it in the same way that you approach progressive overload and training. You want to microdose that UV, typically in the earlier morning time to avoid burns for these people who are really susceptible. And then you continue to build on that over time. And then another important aspect of this is, I think, not using anything that filters or alters the spectrum. So sunglasses, sunscreen, not being behind low emission glass with direct sunlight hitting it onto your skin. That's very important. And then darkness at night, because that's essentially where the skin barrier regenerates itself comprehensively. So it's all unified into one system around the light and dark cycle.
Okay.
Anything real specific with the type of glasses, blue light blocking glasses? I think some people get confused. You got kind of more of an orange or red tint and then yellowish. But you also are mentioning like some companies are maybe not great. So like what should people be looking for in those?
Yeah, the clear ones are absolutely useless. Definitely don't buy those or you'll waste your money. You can test this very easily if you like have a RGB color spectrum. Like you can see if it's blocking blue and green. Yellow ones are great, like the ones you're wearing for daytime use, I think, if you're under a lot of artificial light. And then dark orange and red is the creme de la creme of these blue blockers, because that's, red is like blocking blue light on steroids. And then I think the orange is a nice middle ground for most people.
Yeah, the red's sometimes hard to see.
I struggle to see with the red.
Can't see shit with the red ones on. What about like phone settings and any protective stuff on your screen, or just glasses will probably do the trick?
Lowering brightness is going to be the most important thing, along with blocking the blue. So you can use f.lux for the laptop computer. You can use Iris for those two as well. You can use One Tap Zap on Gumroad. All of these things are essentially ways to just hack, for lack of a better word, your technology to make it a little bit less damaging in terms of the light spectrum.
And if you change your phone to like something like grayscale, does that cut it, or is that not really?
It's not good enough.
It's the same.
Yeah, because if you take a spectrometer and you put it to that grayscale, there's still a huge spike of blue. Yeah.
And some of those websites you were mentioning will they change the overall color and brightness of the phone?
Yeah, with Iris and One Tap Zap, I mean, you can make the screen completely red, so no blue light whatsoever. F-Lux, I think there's still a little bit of blue light, but it basically puts it at 2700 Kelvin, which is very warm.
In studying all this, has this led you down a rabbit hole of like studying water and studying like a lot of other things and even like non-native EMF versus native EMF and so forth?
Yeah, I mean, talk about rabbit holes. Yeah, I'm certainly not an expert by any means on this, but I have looked into water a little bit. I think the work of Victor Schauberger is very important. Austrian forester who was obsessed with studying water in the early 1900s. Ended up creating energy generation through these techniques using the water vortex, which then actually got picked up by the Nazis, and they wanted him to create flying saucers using his tech, which is crazy to think about. Outside of that, I mean, structured water is very real. Near infrared light outside.
What is structured water?
It's essentially a fourth phase of water. So it's not liquid, it's not a gas, and it's not the other ice or the other form that I forgot about. But it's kind of in a gel-like state. And if you look at the work of Dr. Gerald Pollack, he was one of the people who studied this scientifically. And he showed that infrared from the solar spectrum actually structures the water in a specific phase to then create this exclusion zone. It's easy water off of hydrophilic surfaces in the body. And so that, I think, performs a very important role, one that I'm just beginning to scratch the surface on. There are other people who are way smarter than me on that. And then it also ties into electromagnetism. I think, our bodies are designed for native natural EMFs. The mitochondria evolved to sense these native EMFs like Schumann resonance, geomagnetic fields, grounding is a big one. And they are fundamentally and chronically destroyed by non-native EMFs from technology, let's say 5G, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, which is, inconvenient for us in this day and age, but I think there are ways to protect yourself or at least create more balance in the body.
Is airplane mode effective or?
Yeah, very effective.
So stuff like that can be things that could be at least a little helpful.
Yeah, like if I put the phone in the pocket, it's always on airplane mode. It's never on Wi-Fi or LTE or anything, especially for women with bras too. I know that's a big one. Just put the phone in the bra. Always on airplane mode.
Yeah, it makes it that's convenient. That's easy. Anyone can do that little minor precaution. From some of my understanding is like, and I might be wrong on some of this, but some of my understanding is like that the non-native EMF, for lack of better ability to explain, sort of dries us out, and the native EMF is things that could promote better health, potentially less pain, less stiffness. Maybe the body moves a little bit better, and maybe the body is like hydrated better. And I don't literally just mean like pounding water or electrolytes, but getting some of this from the sunlight and getting this from the native EMF that's here. We had David Herrera on our podcast a couple times, and he was explaining some of this, and just a lot of it really made a lot of sense to me. As someone ages, the water in their body becomes less and less. I believe like a baby is like something like 60% water or something like that. And then when you're 30, maybe that's gone down 10%, and maybe it trickles down as you age. But maybe for some people that are having good health practices, maybe they're able to keep that hydration, maybe through movement, maybe through something called mechanotransduction, which some people are a fan of because it seems like it can keep the flow and the circulation. Like for me personally, my body feels like it got kinked somewhere, like a hose. And then things don't flow the way that they should. And so my body kind of got stuck. My body kind of got dry. And what I'm working on now is trying to like hydrate everything and trying to get everything to move better and to move smoother. Have you seen anything about that in terms of like non-native EMF kind of destroying the hydration of the body?
To a very surface level, I think it does dry you out in that sense. I think it does cause some sort of cellular dehydration. If you study non-native EMF and its impact on like cellular, cellular function.
Biology, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you talk about voltage-gated calcium channels and, influx of calcium that causes second and third order consequences. Again, there's smarter people who can talk about that, but I think there are real effects. Like if you look at the work of Gilbert Ling, who was just an incredible researcher of water, and this sort of discussion, that's a good rabbit hole to go down. But yeah. leave that for more intelligent people.
Have you connected the sun a little bit to grounding? Like if you're like, hey, if I could be outside and I can have this opportunity to kick my shoes off, do you do that?
Absolutely, yeah. I think it's just a natural coupled system. If you're outside, you're likely grounded, at least if we're speaking in, pre-modern times. And so I think, this is an area of human biology that I'm very fascinated by, like biological semiconduction, piezoelectricity, flexoelectricity. Like you study how bones work and how essentially every organ and cell in your body works. I mean, it quite literally uses electric charge in various ways. I know Nick Lane actually mentioned this. He's a researcher somewhere, but he talked about how, on the inner mitochondrial membrane, if you look at the electric charge, it's only maybe about 150 to 200 millivolts. But when you consider that you shrink that down to 5 millionths of a millimeter, I believe, 5 nanometers, that electric charge essentially, is equivalent to a bolt of lightning. Now, if you extend that to...
Yeah, I remember hearing that too. I was like, what the...
It's crazy. You extend that to the trillions of mitochondria in your body and you realize that you have one of the most sophisticated electromagnetic systems on the planet.
Shit. What are some suggestions you have towards sleep? Obviously, we are talking about like getting the environment dark. We talked about blue light blocking glasses. Any other tricks or hacks that you found to be super effective?
Yeah, watching sunrise will, I keep going back to it, I sound like a broken record, but it's that effective, will actually deepen the quality of your sleep. It will help you have just good orchestrated sleep cycles.
20 minutes, 10 minutes?
Could be 5 minutes.
Okay.
Just as long as you're out there and getting it. That's a big one. Sunbathing has its own independent effects because the light and dark cycle go together. But if we're talking about the nighttime, I think avoiding food pretty strictly past sunset is a big one for me because the digestive system is under circadian control. I've seen people create acid reflux and GERD just simply by eating late at night. And that can also be explained scientifically. But outside of that, no food, no liquid past sunset.
It's like the worst rule ever, by the way.
I know, it's unfortunate, but I think that there is a way to adapt around that. So you don't necessarily have to do strict no liquid or no food. Maybe if you have a couple blueberries with some honey, you could actually deepen the quality of your sleep. You have some spring water, whatnot. But these are just general rules of thumb that I want people to follow.
Okay.
And from that point, making it dark after sunset's the most important thing because you want to protect that endogenous circulatory melatonin from the pineal gland, which needs darkness in order to build up. And you need a few hours of that too after nightfall. And outside of that, going to bed before 10 p.m. I think is key. If you study growth hormone, you get the biggest surge of growth hormone during that time. And typical stuff, dark room, don't have Wi-Fi on, put everything on airplane mode, cold room, all that stuff works.
We did talk a little bit about pre-diabetes and stuff like that. Like, what are some things that you've been able to help people with? Because I know that you're interacting with a lot of people.
So I've worked with all kinds of people, everyday 9-to-5 guys to CEOs who have less time. And so like I said, the circadian framework is adaptable. And so if somebody's dealing with like a little bit of extra body weight, that can be easily solved. I've seen that happen personally. If they are dealing with brain fog, their hormonal system is off, let's say they're even dealing with hair loss, to some degree you can help all these things. I think it easily translates.
Why'd you look at me? Why'd you look at me? Why do you look at me?
I don't know. He shaves his head on purpose. He's got
didn't
plenty
do that
of
on
Purpose, bro. I'm joking.
Yeah.
I'm joking. I am bald.
You're a beautiful man, by
He
the way.
has anger management issues. He's getting help. Don't worry.
But yeah, I think it translates into so many different things. But what I am very clear on to people is that I do not treat advanced disease. I am all about prevention because I think that's the most important thing for me personally, considering what my dad went through and what I had to go through along with my family, which was a living hell essentially. And so that's the most important thing in my mind. But I will say there are a lot of advanced situations or conditions that can be helped in a big, big way.
What are some habits that you think led to your dad having heart disease? With all the research, like, are you like, shit, man, wish I could bring him back and like just communicate with him about some of this stuff? Could really have been helpful.
Sunbathing wasn't a thing. Looking back, very dark skinned, Middle Eastern. So he didn't sunbathe often. He was outside a lot. But I think outside of that, just not really looking into the nutrition aspect of things, which I think is important. certainly didn't, go into ApoB or LP(a), any of these other things. And I think he was chronically stressed for sure, especially towards the latter end of his life. And the sleep deprivation was a big thing as well. So I think just general circadian disruption, all these things come together to create that.
Question about the sleep disruption. I think a lot of older people generally think that as you get older, your sleep will just get worse because that's what they noticed. I mean, that's what happened to their parents. That's what they noticed with the older people around them. Sleep just gets worse. Now, again, doing the work that you do and working with the amount of people that you have, is that a fact that sleep will degrade, but you can still keep it quality, or does sleep have to degrade as you get older?
I think there is some minimal, degradation there. I think you're going to lose something considering age. Yeah. I mean, age is undefeated. We're all going to die. But the quality and the rhythm of the sleep stages, I think, is something that you can maintain into old age easily. And I've seen this time and time again. I mean, sleep is probably one of the biggest issues that I see a lot of older people deal with who come to me. And within weeks, honestly, within days, you can get a lot of the stuff fixed, like insomnia or waking up in the middle of the night to pee. All these things have a circadian explanation, and so there is an answer to it if you go deep enough on the first principles.
Okay.
What are some other people that you would like for some of our listeners to check out as well that are in this space that have good information?
I'll give them a heuristic, actually. I will say that don't be put off by certain characters in the space who are hard-minded.
Jack Cruz.
I mean, hey, we got to be honest. Like, I honestly love his interpretations of things. I think he's world-class in his explanation of certain things. But again, the messenger is important. You have to, I've been laughing like that plenty of times, don't worry.
Yeah.
But the messenger is important. And so we have to understand that. Don't let it throw you off on the work. And take everything with an open mind. Because I'm not perfect. Like, I can be an asshole at times on social media, especially if somebody rubs me the wrong way. I do have a chip on my shoulder. But at the same time, like, there's a bigger mission at play. And so don't let that cloud your vision.
What's been some of your posts that you've had that have had the biggest reaction? Like what's been the thing you have to constantly talk about?
Sunlight skin cancer, relationship between melanoma, basal and squamous cell carcinoma. Sunglasses is honestly even more energetically charged than that, surprisingly. And
they're like, I want to look cool. These look awesome.
What can I say to that? Melanin is something that, the DNA damage thing is something that I have a lot of people talking about. And I do honestly, I've cut my teeth on trying to challenge dermatologists. Like, if I could bring any dermatologist here with me to have a conversation, I would love that. But I think a lot of them either, shy away from that, or they just think I'm a pseudoscientific quack. And so those are things that I'm constantly engaging with.
Right. Awesome, man. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, guys, I appreciate it.
Where can people find you?
Zaid Dahhaj, ZaidKDahhaj on X, Instagram, Substack. Substack goes a lot deeper on this stuff. And then the 2 a.m. podcast is a podcast where we talk about all sorts of things, including health.
Awesome. I'm looking forward to being on your show.
Can't wait.
Strength is never weakness. Weakness is never strength. Catch you guys later. Bye.